In this video, you will learn how to multiply fractions. These are a few different ways that you might see multiplication written in problems that you're going to do. Sometimes it looks like an X, like a multiplication sign that you're used to seeing. Sometimes it looks like a dot in between the two numbers that are being multiplied. And sometimes parentheses are used to represent multiplication. Think of multiplying as equal groups. For example, 3 times 5 is 3 groups of 5. It could also be 5 groups of 3. So, since fractions are names for parts of a whole, then multiplying by a fraction means that you'll have a fraction of a group or part of a group. One really important tip when you're multiplying fractions: estimate first. Round each fraction to a whole number or to an easier fraction. Then when you're done, make sure that you're close to your estimate to make sure that your answer is reasonable. Estimating first can save you a lot of headaches later. Pizza. It's a pretty good tool when it comes to explaining fractions. 1/6 times 2. This pizza is cut into 6 equal pieces. Each one of those pieces is 1/6 of the pizza. So if we're going to multiply that 1/6 by 2, that means we're doubling how much pizza we have. So double of one slice of pizza will be 2 slices of pizza. Sometimes you're taught that when you multiply fractions, you need to put a 1 under each whole number so that it has a denominator, like this. Then to multiply these fractions, 1/6 times 2 over 1, we simply multiply straight across. 1 times 2 across the top is 2, and 6 times 1 across the bottom is 6. So 1/6 times 2 over 1 equals 2/6. How about 4/6 times 1/2? Another way to think of multiplication is to use the word of in place of times. So 4/6 times 1/2 is the same as 4/6 of 1/2. And we know that multiplication has the commutative property, which means that the numbers can be switched. They can move back and forth. It doesn't matter what order that they're in. So 4/6 of 1/2 or 1/2 of 4/6. We know that half of 4 is 2. So half of 4/6 is going to be 2/6. We also know that we can multiply straight across. So the numerators, 4 times 1, is 4. Let's try one with mixed numbers. 5.5 times 1/3. Here are 5.5 pizzas. We're going to need to make the 5.5 into an improper fraction before we begin. We can change the mixed fraction to an improper fraction. So the 5.5 can become 11 halves. Now we need to multiply straight across. 11 times 1 is 11. And 2 times 3 is 6. Remember that each slice of pizza here is 1/6. So let's see what 11/6 looks like. There's our 11/6. It's 11 slices of pizza. Those 11 slices of pizza make up one whole pizza with 5 pieces left over. So 11/6 is equal to 1 5/6. Now that we've reviewed a little bit with fractions, let's take a look at some examples. -1 times 5/8. We can start by putting a 1 underneath the -1. This doesn't change the value of it, it just makes it look more like a fraction. When we multiply straight across, we get 1 times 5, which is 5, and 1 times 8, which is 8. Now, you remember that a negative times a positive is going to make a negative answer. But we can also write it like this. The negative sign can either be on the numerator or the denominator, or in front of the fraction. They all mean the same thing. Example number 2, 4/7 times -3 1/2. Let's estimate this. 4/7, that's a little bit more than 1/2. Let's estimate that at 1/2. And 3.5, well, let's see, half of 3.5. It's probably going to be in the 1.5 to 2 range, because half of 3 is 1.5, and half of 4, well, that's 2. So I think the answer is going to be somewhere within the 1.5 to 2 range. Okay, the first thing we want to look at now is the sign for the answer. We have a positive number times a negative number. we know that that's going to give us a negative number. So I'm going to put this negative here so we don't forget it later. Now let's change the 3.5 to an improper fraction. So I'm just rewriting the problem here. 4/7 times, instead of 3.5, now we'll put 7 halves. Yes, don't forget the negative, but we already thought about the negative. Remember, we put the negative up at the top so that we didn't forget it later. To get that 7 halves, we can do 3 times 2, which is 6, and then add the 1, making 7 halves. Now we can multiply straight across. 4 times 7, that's 28, and 7 times 2, that's 14. Now looking at these two numbers, 28 and 14, I can see that they're both even. So I think we probably could divide both of them by 2. But if we look even closer, we notice that they're actually both divisible by 14. 28 is double 14. So let's divide both by 14. 28 divided by 14 is 2, and 14 divided by 14 is 1. So 28 over 14 is equal to 2 over 1. Don't forget the negative. So negative 2 over 1 is equal to just negative 2. Is that reasonable based on our estimate? Remember, our estimate was 1.5 to 2. I'd have to say that that is reasonable. We guessed that it would be 1.5 to 2, and it's 2. That negative just means the positive times the negative, so we weren't really thinking about that when we were estimating. Now, I don't know about you, but I like to do things the easiest way possible. And when we just did that problem, we did not do it the easiest way possible. Let's look at it again. In the end, when we had a 28 at the top and a 14 on the bottom, both of those numbers were divisible by a few different numbers. One of those numbers that they're divisible by was 7. Notice how the two corners have 7s. We can divide those 7s by 7. So 7 divided by 7 is 1, and the other 7 divided by 7 is 1. Now we'll look at the opposite two corners, the 4 and the 2. Are they divisible by anything? Yep, they're both even, so they're both divisible by 2. Let's cross those out. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 4 divided by 2 is 2. Now we have kind of a mess, but we're really just dealing with 2 over 1 times 1 over 1. Multiply straight across, so we get 2 over 1. And again, with the negative, positive times a negative is a negative. So we ended up with the same answer. We just simplified before we multiplied instead of after. Example number 3. We're going to look at one with exponents now. Negative 1 1/4 to the third power. The third power means we multiply it by itself 3 times. So we will have negative 1 1/4 times negative 1 1/4 times negative 1 1/4. But we need to be able to multiply straight across, so we need to make those mixed fractions into improper fractions. 1 times 4 is 4, plus 1 is 5. So 1 1/4 is equal to 5/4. Let's rewrite it as 5/4. Now we can multiply straight across. Let's look first at the signs. We have a negative times a negative times a negative. If you remember from the multiplying integers video, if you have an odd number of negatives that you're multiplying together, then your answer will be negative. Another way to think of it is the first two negatives, so negative times negative, positive, then multiply again by the third negative, and that makes it negative. Now, we have 5 times 5, which is 25, times 5 again, 125. Then we multiply the denominators. 4 times 4 is 16, times 4 again is 64. Now we can try to change that improper fraction into a mixed number, so it's a little easier to understand. 64 of those 125 64ths is going to make one whole. Then there will be 61 of them left. So 125 64ths is equal to 1 and 61 64ths. I know this looks like a lot to write out, but if you show your work, write down all your steps, you'll be able to keep track of what you're doing. Then if you make a mistake, it's easy to figure out where you went wrong. Make sure you're writing down all your steps so that you can keep track of your thinking. Now you should know how to multiply fractions. Thanks for watching.